As we learn about new operators and functions, and even as we consider the form of the results we want to derive from our calculations, it is important to keep in mind the data types of the values we want to process as well as of the results we want to ultimately receive. Usually, operators and functions are designed to expect a certain type of value and to generate a certain type of value. The incoming and outgoing data types are not always the same. It is true that MySQL and many other programming languages can perform certain kinds of implicit type conversions, but it does require extra processing to perform these transformations. Our code will be processed much faster if we write it to supply the data types that are expected by the operators and functions we choose to use. There are three data types that we commonly encounter in calculations, at least at the level that we are playing at for the time being. They are number, character string, and temporal, or date and time values. We won't be working with any other data types until more advanced courses, but there is plenty to learn from these three. In fact, we will have an entire chapter devoted to exploring some of the most important details and variations of these not too much later in this course. But for now, we just need to address these three general data types as they apply to our use of operators and functions in calculation expressions. Numbers are the most basic data type. We use them with the simple arithmetic operators as well as with functions used for numeric manipulation. When we use them, we simply type the digits of the number, along with any necessary decimal point or negation sign, and if we are using real numbers with exponential notation, an optional letter E to indicate the exponent. We do not use quotes around numbers, as they are recognized and understood without them. Expressions expect to see numbers in them, so they are natural in that environment. Character strings are also used frequently in MySQL expressions, but they do not naturally belong there. In order to inject a character string into a calculation, we must enclose that string of characters in quotes. We can use either single or double quotes for this purpose. The beginning and ending quotes of the string must just match. If we try to use a character string within an expression without enclosing it in quotes, MySQL will try to interpret the string as a variable name instead of as a string of characters. If no variable exists with that name, we will get back an error message like we see here. But if a variable of that name does exist, the value of that variable will be used instead of the character string we intended, and it is very unlikely that the variable will contain a string that is exactly the same as its name, so we will get back the wrong result. Just be careful to put quotes around static character strings and all will be well. There are no operators in MySQL that perform character string manipulations. In many languages there can be an operator to perform string concatenation, but in this language we use a function for that instead. There are a number of functions that expect to see character strings as parameters, and many functions that also return character string results. But if we try to use an arithmetic operator on a character string, the string will usually be interpreted as a 0, unless it looks like a number. The best practice is to use numbers and character strings in the appropriate context. Date and time values are also cast to look like character strings, in that we also enclose them in quotes. Their interpretation as temporal values depends on two things: the context in which they are used and the format of the string of characters we provide. There are certain functions that expect temporal values as parameters or that yield temporal values as results. There are also some operators that can accept a temporal value as an operand, but we must also include an appropriate keyword in the proper syntax to avoid an error message or an erroneous result. We will discuss this in some detail in the chapter on calculations and expressions later in this course. The format of a temporal value is very important. The default format for a date value, for example, is a 4-digit year number, followed by a 2-digit month number, followed by a 2-digit day number, padded with leading zeros in each of those sections if necessary, and with all of these parts separated by hyphen characters like we see here. We have functions that can transform such values into other formats for display purposes, or convert date values supplied in other formats into the standard one. But this is the format we see in examples all the time. There are also system variables that allow us to change the standard temporal formats for dates, times, and date-time values, but it is best practice to leave them at their default settings. All right, we have talked about a lot of building blocks here so far, but we still have a few other basic issues to discuss that will come in handy once we begin to address data stored in database tables. The next set of lessons will discuss the basics of variables and some of the ways we can use them in MySQL.